Trying to get natural lighting, which is why I've opened the blinds while recording for the first time in ever. But now my neighbors will be able to see me dance around in front of a camera like a fucking dick. Okay, so this video is not about the NPC memes specifically, but it does tie into the subject matter that we're going to talk about, so I thought I might as well just point out a few flaws that it has. Now, I will admit, the NPC meme was funny to me for like 15 minutes, and then all the right-wing drones started accusing everyone they disagreed with of being an NPC. And then they acted like that was an argument. I almost died that day of an irony overdose, and much like food poisoning has really soured me to eggs, this has really soured me to the NPC meme. But here's the thing about the NPC meme, the premise just does not make sense. So as far as my third-hand knowledge goes, the NPC meme sprang up after a study was published, or somehow came into the cultural zeitgeist, that said that, a significant portion of the global population do not have internal monologue. And then those people who do not have internal monologue were just called NPCs. But actually, those very same people should be called PCs, because that is the behavior you would expect from a player character. All things being equal, if NPCs and PCs are generally the same level of power as entities within the game world, PCs require much less complexity in their coding because, unlike NPCs, they do not come with decision-making algorithms. And why would they, really? All of the decision-making is outsourced to the players, so all they have to do is accept and relay input. An NPC, however, must react to the world around it by making its own decisions. It needs to take the inputs that it gets from the world that it is in, and then use its own decision-making systems to reach the proper course of action that it will take next. So that's what internal monologue is. It's the decision-making algorithm that PCs just do not have. So the NPCs were the PCs all along. And that, by the way, is not just an aside, it actually ties into today's topic very well. The simulation hypothesis has been gaining a lot of traction in people's minds over the past few years. If you don't know what that is, it's the idea that the universe around us is not, in the most traditional sense of the word, real, but actually just a simulation. This simulation comes from a higher universe. And this conclusion is based on a pretty simple wager. There is no reason to assume that we will not, in the near or far future, gain the ability to simulate entire universes or fractions of universes, and there is no reason to assume that we won't be very efficient at it either. We also know that we will definitely do it if we ever get the ability to do it, because we already do to the limited extent of our abilities. We use simulations for science, yes, but also massively just for entertainment. The concept of an ancestor simulation is a simulation where a certain time period in the past is perfectly simulated, and you can visit or just observe it and see what happens. And there's also no reason to not just add fantastical elements to that. It really depends on what you're looking to achieve with each individual simulation. And if we know that we will do this one day, we can't assume that we haven't done it already. Considering that the real universe is probably able to simulate several sub-universes, and those sub-universes may be able to simulate several sub-universes of their own, especially if you assume that there's only one real universe and not multiple, you come to the point where simulated universes vastly outnumber real universes. This becomes especially true if you consider higher dimensions. We in our four-dimensional universe regularly simulate universes with fewer than 3 spatial dimensions. I mean, there is a huge resurgence of side-scrollers on the indie game market. So the simulation hypothesis is not just logically possible, but stochastically likely. The problem, of course, being that unless the people who run the simulation straight up tell us that we are in a simulation, there is absolutely no way of finding out whether or not we are in a simulation. And, this obviously terrifies a lot of people, as well it might, because it is a pretty terrifying notion to think about the fact that you're not at all real. This leads many of the people who are terrified by this to find comfort in the idea that at least they know for sure that they are real. They are the player characters. They are the flesh and blood people that also exist outside of the simulation. Because after all, I think, therefore I am, no? Well, actually, no, not so much. Imagine we copied a human mind and ran it on a computer. Ignoring the substrate problem for a moment, we're just gonna assume that we have developed appropriate hardware to simulate a human mind. I mean, Jesus, they could even be located on a surrogate body that functions exactly like a human body, except for the fact that the brain is a machine. We turn the thing on, it behaves and thinks like a human, inwardly and outwardly. It is not a mere facsimile. Ultimately, the human mind, or the soul if you want to call it that, is virtual. It is software that requires appropriate hardware to run. And considering that that hardware already exists, there is no reason to assume that we wouldn't be able to develop a better version of that hardware in the future that would maybe allow us to do neat things like frame jacking. If you don't know, frame jacking is basically you alter your perception of how fast time passes, so an hour could last a second, or a second could last an hour. The human brain does actually have a very limited ability to do frame jacking. Like if you've ever been in a very high adrenaline situation and time seemed to slow down around you and you were able to react faster, or when you go to sleep at night and time seems to pass a lot faster when you are asleep. But if we apply all of this knowledge to the simulation hypothesis, it turns out we may not be real at all. It is entirely possible that we are just Sims. We exist only in the context of the simulation. Obviously, if that's true, we also do exist on the higher world in some way, shape, or form, much like Sims exist as silica patterns on our hard drives and electrical impulses in our computers. But our reality is still here. If it gets Danny DeLito'd, or if we get Danny DeLito'd out of it, we cease to exist. And statistically speaking, we're probably not the main character either. There's a strong argument to make that you will only render the parts of a simulation that you actually need to exist. Basically, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to perceive it, why render a sound wave? Thus, the logic goes that because you always perceive everything as rendered, you must be the main character of the simulation. But how do you really know that the higher universe has comparable simulation restrictions to what we think about? We really cannot make that assumption, and even if we could, it might be that our universe is that special one universe where they want to really simulate every detail down to the smallest quark in a very accurate fashion to study whatever they would want to be studying. Maybe we and the incredibly complex reality that we live in is barely more than an afterthought in their massive computing power, like a single redundant line of code in a video game. But to assume this is of course as statistically likely as any other thing, because we simply have no way of knowing. We do not know the purpose of our universe as intended by the simulators. Maybe we are characters in an alternate history world timeline created by future humanity, where everyone just gets to follow the character storylines that interest them the most. Maybe the whole simulation, everything that you know, popped into existence right now, and all of your memories are fake. Maybe you are a real flesh and blood person that exists on a higher level of the simulation, and you've come here on a vacation or to just be part of a very immersive MMO. And before you complain about the fact that who would go to such a boring reality that we live in? People watch TV dramas. That's a thing that they do because it's not really all that boring. And especially if you're immortal or frame-jacked or both, living a lifetime immersed in a fake life in some historical period that you always wanted to try out really isn't that far-fetched. I mean, you have watched films that you didn't really want to watch, you just wanted to try them out. Also, I recommend watching my video on how the Buddhists were right all along on the whole simulation hypothesis thing. At the end of the day, it really is not possible to know whether or not we are real in the traditional sense, and if that even matters at all. After all, what is the measure of reality? If the world that you perceive around you is real to you, does that not make it to a certain extent real? We cannot know the intentions of our simulators. We cannot know if there even are simulators and if we're really simulated. We cannot know if they care about us. We cannot know if they even know that we exist. And we cannot know that maybe we are our own simulators. The point that I'm trying to make here is just because you think and you are a person that has internal monologue or no internal monologue and has complex decision making and are a consciousness that has the ability of some degree of introspection, that doesn't mean you're not an NPC in some massive simulation. And there's nothing wrong with that. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, share it to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Stick around for Wednesday when we will read the other half of the Harry Potter fan fiction that we started last week. It was tremendous fun, and I expect it to continue to be tremendous fun this time around. In that spirit, have a fantastic day. Don't take shrooms while watching this video. It's probably, unless you're watching this video backwards and are very good at interpreting reverse saying of words, this is the right time to do this warning. If not, it's all gonna be fine, and see you around, cunts.